Truth Espresso episode 353.
In a world gone bonkers.
It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started and...
Where the culture is a dumpster fire.
We're coming for your children.
And churches have lost their way.
I am really uncomfortable with the story of the crucifixion.
It's time to wake up. With Truth Espresso.
Truth Espresso.
Your weekly shot of truth. And now your host, Daniel Minnick.
Well, hey there, friends, family, foes, and of course, lurkers alike. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, for another episode of Truth Espresso. And I hope that you will find this episode exciting because we're going to talk about lawns. Well, I'm not here to talk about how to cultivate your lawn, how to make your lawn a fresh, beautiful green carpet in this episode because, to be honest with you, I cannot claim to be an expert on that sort of agriculture, but we're going to ask and answer the question, are lawns evil? And if that question sounds a little strange to you, well, there are some people who believe that lawns are indeed evil. They're destructive. They're basically authoritarian. And I will mention something that inspired this episode. There are several things that kind of made it to where it was like, I really need to cover this on an episode of Truth Espresso. It started when my coworker, who provides a wealth of subject matter for episodes of Truth Espresso, started the ball rolling on this topic. The same coworker that inspired my series on Was Jesus a Socialist also inspired my series on Did Trump Really Say That? And now I'm not starting a series, this is just a one-off episode here, but we have some pretty interesting conversations at work. And I never thought too deeply before about the ideas of lawns being a controversial subject until my coworker brought it up. Now, I grew up in a rural area where land had been in the family for years. My family owned severals of acres of cheap land near brush and especially forests. And there are quite a few farms where I grew up. So just outside a small town, my family had first a trailer and then a small house, but acres of land with a long dirt and cobbled driveway. We also had a garden that was probably about an acre itself. But the lawn on both sides of this long driveway up to the main road was something that could host large get-togethers. Very nice for us, for cousins, neighbor kids, or kids from church or school to visit. So there was plenty of room to play around, and it was all fun and games until someone had to mow it. My parents, or my brother and I, when we became teenagers, would have to schedule most of a day, like on a Saturday especially, to tackle the project of mowing our front yard. And we weren't like the privileged suburbanites who brought out their riding mower to trim their glorified patio for 5 minutes. We had a push mower for our large yard, and we mowed for a few hours, which was enough to cut one side of the driveway. Then we went inside the house and ate lunch, and then we finished the job on the other side of the driveway in the afternoon. And other family members owned land around the area where we could walk through the nearby grass and pine trees to a clearing where 2 ponds were the home of hundreds of bass and koi fish. And these ponds weren't a little pit filled with water in a backyard either. Each of these 2 ponds was probably about a 1/4 mile in length, and you could boat or swim in them. And they were like miniature lakes. urbanites or suburbanites might just call them lakes anyway. Now, as a poor kid living out in the sticks, but surrounded by land and trees, I kind of had a little understanding of nature. I wasn't a horticulturalist or an expert in gardening, but I did help out a little bit. My family had both a garden and a lawn to cultivate. And at night we heard the crickets and saw the lightning bugs outside the screen door and the windows. I have never lived in an inner city surrounded by asphalt. However, my wife and kids and I now live in a suburb, in a housing community, complete with a homeowners association. Yeah, HOAs, the bane of suburbanite society. And we have our half-acre backyard. Now, mowing takes about an hour for both the front and backyards combined. And yes, we must mow to keep the peeps at the HOA happy. Not that we would have a reason not to mow, of course. We like to maintain our grass out there. But because of an HOA, we're just not the only ones interested in how our yard looks. And so on the topic of lawns, my coworker about a year ago asked me some fascinating questions about lawns that had never really crossed my mind to ponder. As a kid who grew up modestly and mowed a large lawn on one side of a garden, I never thought that lawns were something to think about, other than that you don't want to let your grass grow into a jungle. I've never had a lawn that looked like one of those perfectly manicured green carpets, but we just trimmed the grass and take decent care of it so it didn't grow too tall. But now the very idea of lawns was under scrutiny, that somehow lawns are a useless relic of European colonialism and they waste valuable space and they're bad for the environment. After planting ideas into my head, no pun intended, my coworker began to watch a short video making fun of lawns and all the care people put into them and how frivolous and meaningless they were. And he had plenty of chuckles along the way while watching it, while I was wondering what I could have been missing all my life. I remember another time since then when my coworker made another passing quip about the useless nonsense of American and European lawn culture. And then fast forward a little over a week ago as of this recording, when I was doing a quick scroll down my Twitter or X account, I noticed that someone posted a meme. And this meme was divided into a top half and a bottom half, as many meme pictures are. The top half said, if everybody had yards like this, with a picture of a crop garden with heads of lettuce and such, the bottom half continued by saying, instead of like this, and it had a picture of a manicured carpet of grass with a lawnmower in the corner of the picture. And then the text at the bottom finished the sentence, no one would be starving. So to recap the meme, the argument is that if people would just give up their useless turf grass lawns and replace them with crop gardens, we could eliminate world hunger, or at least national hunger, or something like that. And when I first saw that meme, I thought, well, there's kind of a little bit of a point there. How could you argue with that? Aren't lettuce, cabbage, tomatoes, and cucumbers far more useful to us than a carpet of grass? I mean, why do people put so much time, effort, and resources into manicuring a lawn when they can't eat the grass? But of course, it didn't take my brain long to start asking questions, and then I started to research. Could there be some kind of ideology behind this rhetorical disdain for lawns coming from my coworker and memes online? Why, yes, there is. There is indeed an anti-lawn or no-lawn movement. and it's often rooted in socialism and identity politics, just like anything else is that tries to quash your sentiments for aesthetics and enjoyability and middle-class lifestyle. So I found an article as I was researching this anti-lawn movement. I also found on reddit.com a thread where one socialist comment says about lawns, 40 million acres of land kept out of the food cycle just to satisfy a completely empty aesthetic that feeds into just another inane industry. And then one commenter said, food, not lawns, and linked to a website that's actually foodnotlawns.com. So, the idea is that lawns are nonsensical and useless because we're putting all this effort into cultivating something that serves no purpose other than eye candy. And then there's this article by an Alexi Bunton entitled Why and How to Decolonize Your Yard, and this is on Bioneers.org. I will also provide a link to this article in the show notes. So, decolonize your yard, what is that all about? Well, here's a quote from the article. It says, Americans love to manicure their lawns. It is a sign of pride and home ownership deeply steeped in the American dream to buy a house in the suburbs and raise a family. This dream, however, belies deeper nefarious roots in settler colonization and white supremacy. Now, isn't the point of industrialization and capitalism that what was once a luxury only available to the aristocracy is now available to the middle class? So why is it a problem that middle class people are now owning yards with lawns? Remember the 1987 movie called Wall Street? And the character Gordon Gekko, the rich snob, used a Motorola Dynatac 8000X that cost $4,000 at the time, which is equivalent to over $12,000 in today's money. So at this time, in the late 1980s, cell phone technology was available, but only for the aristocracy. Fast forward to now, and everyone has a cell phone. And not just the glorified walkie-talkie that Gordon Gekko had in the movie Wall Street. What even poor people have today in a modest smartphone is more powerful than wall-sized supercomputers in the 1980s. So if something used to be true only for the rich, but is now true for just about everyone, why should we care about so-called colonization? We're no longer colonized if we plebes now have cell phones, right? And why should we consider ourselves colonized if we plebes can have grass lawns too? Just think about this. If filet mignon dinners used to be part of European aristocracy, does that mean we should shut down all the upscale restaurants? Should middle-class people not have the option to be able to save a bit of money and then go to a nice restaurant and enjoy filet mignon with a date? If something we now enjoy used to be only available to so-called colonizers, why would the answer be to rid the middle class of those things so that they're once again only available to so-called colonizers? So I ask, make it make sense. But the turf grass yard, as we come back to that becomes a political statement because such yards have been colonized, and we need to decolonize our yards from the white supremacist European grass turf. Further down in the Bioneers article, it says, applying this concept as a metaphor, to colonize a yard means to remove indigenous plants and replace them with something foreign, disrupting and often destroying the original ecosystem in the process. On the other hand, decolonizing, or rather indigenizing a yard means replacing invasives with native plants local to the area. So, because the turf grass we have in the United States wasn't native to the United States, just as Europeans colonized the land against the indigenous tribes of Native Americans, we have colonized the soil with foreign seed. We imported foreign grass seed from Europe, and the land doesn't quite like it unless we put all this time and effort and resources just to keep the land colonization going. And we should decolonize our yards by replacing turf grass with plants that are native to our area. Well, a couple of responses to this would be to ask some questions. Did you know that tumbleweeds aren't native to the United States either? They came accidentally when shipping flaxseed from Russia. And our tumbleweeds are otherwise known as Russian thistle. Tumbleweeds, however, have become an icon of the American West. So, should we try to decolonize the West from tumbleweeds? Well, good luck with that. They grow so wild and are out of control, we have no ability to get rid of the tumbleweeds. We just have to accept that the tumbleweeds are an icon of the American West and live with it. But tumbleweeds are now an American staple. Oh yeah, and that's just a small example of non-native plants. If you have an apple tree in your yard, well, you need to decolonize your yard from it, let me say. Apples aren't native to the United States. They come from Central Asia. So remember the saying, as American as apple pie? Well, you can't claim apple pie as truly American if they're from the other side of the world. And any Native Americans, Mexicans, Central Americans, and South Americans who like apples, well, tough. They need to decolonize themselves from Asian apples and give them up, right? That is if we take the lawn argument to its logical conclusion. How about Florida oranges? Well, they originally came from Southeast Asia, so get rid of them too. How about mangoes? They're a tropical fruit, but they're originally from South Asian tropics. They don't belong here. Away with them. Cauliflower? That came from the Mediterranean. Yeah, that's still a colonizing area of Europe, right? So you anti-lawn champagne socialists who like cauliflower pizza because gluten and calories, you need to switch back to wheat flour. It's time to decolonize the land from cauliflower. Tomatoes are from Central America, and Europe got them first, and then the United States got them later. So how about Mediterranean food needs to decolonize its pasta dishes from tomatoes? And yes, along with the European turf grass, it's time to decolonize the United States agriculture. From apples, oranges, peaches, watermelons, tomatoes, potatoes, peanuts, and many other things we now enjoy.
Are you living an abundant life? Jesus came to give us eternal life, yes, but also an abundant life here and now, overflowing with the fruit of the Spirit. The Abundant Life podcast encourages and challenges Christians to spiritual change and growth by applying biblical principles to everyday life. Podcast hosts Saso Mendez and Ben Ariano discuss various topics that are helpful for Christians and true to the Scripture, and bring a generous dose of humor. Visit abundantlife.fm and subscribe to get notified of each new episode. That's abundantlife.fm.
But what about environmental concerns? I watched a video called Kill Your Lawn from the New York Times. It's an opinion video, and it warns us that we're killing both the environment and culture with our green grass carpets. So I'll provide a link to this video in the show notes for this episode. But let me play a little clip from this video that says that lawns are destroying our environment.
But there's an ugly truth hiding behind America's glorification of grass. Lawns are damaging our planet, ruining our health, and wasting our time.
Yeah, because, everything you enjoy or do as a middle-class American who happens to own a lawn and enjoys the beauty of it and setting your feet in the grass and letting your kids frolic in it, the political elites don't approve of that for middle-class America, so of course it's going to destroy the environment. And there's another problem with our lawns, according to the video here.
And now, lawn grass is everywhere. There's more lawn than any other crop in America, even corn. So the problems it causes, and there are many, become magnified.
Now, notice that it said that lawns are more than any single crop. This doesn't mean that lawns total more than farmland. It means that all the lawns combined are more than the total of any particular one crop, including corn as a crop. Now, that does sound bad, but it makes sense if there are more Americans wealthy enough to live in the suburbs than before. Now, this lawn area isn't only the average quarter-acre yards for housing communities. It includes commercial lawn turf. It also includes turf that the federal government owns. The National Park Service alone owns over 9,000 acres of lawn. But what about that statistic of lawn versus corn? There are more than 40 million acres of lawn in the United States, but there are more than 91.5 million acres of land allocated for corn usage. So how does that make sense if there's more lawn? How can twice as much corn land result in more lawn? Well, the metric must be that the volume of lawn grass exceeds the volume of corn product, not that the land surface for lawns is more than for corn. So we shouldn't get the wrong idea about these statistics here. Now, what about how grass lawns harm the environment?
The most egregious one? Water. Americans sprinkle so much water on their lawns every year that they could fill 5 million Olympic swimming pools. And of course, the drier the region, the more water needed to keep your neighbor jealous.
Now, according to even the National Park Service itself, the government agency, turf grass can actually help the environment. So I'll provide a link to this part of the National Park Service website. It's an article entitled "The Benefits of Sustainably Managed Turf," because, of course, the National Park Service owns some lawn turf land. So kind of summarizing the points that they give on this article, you can look it up for yourself. Grass turf can filter out chemicals from rainwater and can contribute to underground water reserves. So watering your lawn doesn't just waste water. It ultimately spreads out the water cycle and increases the range of fertile soil. Grass turf can help soil become more rich in nutrients and prevent soil erosion. And grass turf restores oxygen to the air and traps and filters dust from the air. Grass turf also has a cooling effect compared to other surfaces. In other words, if you're worried about so-called climate change or global warming, lawn grass helps keep the air temperature cooler. And the New York Times video compares the water we use to irrigate lawns with how many Olympic swimming pools it could fill. Well, which is better for the environment? Underground water irrigation or Olympic swimming pools with chlorine? Now, most meadow plants have a greater cooling effect than lawn grass, But most meadow yards have smaller, isolated portions of such grass surrounded by dry topsoil. Now, is all that water used for lawns taking it away from farms? Well, back to the New York Times video.
And lawns are directly competing against farms, our food supply for scarce water.
Now, as we said, lawns help underground water and soil fertility. Can all our yards be miniature farms? Can your half acre in your suburban house property be a miniature farm? Are all these yards suitable for farming crops? Of course not. But they do help the soil ultimately for farms indirectly. And should farms get all the water and leave suburbia to dry up like a desert? I don't think the water system for the suburbs is taking it away from the farms, whether houses have lawns or not. And whether you shower with it or water a lawn, the water is going back into the soil or into a body of water from which farms are going to get it. And in fact, there's more water underground, under the surface of the earth, than there is water in the oceans that we see on the surface of the earth. Oh, and of course, one of the problems mentioned is that our lawn grass isn't native to our land here. Ah!
Most American lawn grasses aren't native to America, and they need a cocktail of fertilizers and herbicides to thrive. But herbicides can be really toxic. And millions of pounds of nitrogen fertilizers sprinkled over lawns every year, well, that's a massive source of carbon emissions. And nitrogen runs off into lakes and rivers, turning them into dead zones choked with toxic algae.
Yes, lawn grass isn't native to the United States. That means it requires immense harmful resources to maintain it. Well, again, apples aren't native to America, but Washington State has no discernible problem growing them, and Florida and California have no problem with oranges, and Idaho is perfectly fine with potatoes. And the problem of herbicides and pesticides? Well, welcome to farmland anywhere. Carbon emissions from gas-powered equipment? Well, I have a battery-powered lawnmower. Show me the battery-powered tractors, reapers, combines, and balers. Now, I'm not knocking gas-powered lawnmowers. I'm just making a point. These arguments against lawns harming the environment with wasting water and using gas-powered equipment doesn't really hold water, no pun intended, again. So what are the suggested alternatives for lawns? Well, one of them is like the meme suggested earlier, growing a crop garden to replace a lawn. And the video suggests that we should replace grass lawns with more native meadow type crops, grasses and flowers. So what about growing a crop garden to replace a lawn? Now, it's not like it's just some drop-in replacement. There's going to be your pros and your cons, just like there is with everything else. And, some climates are just not suitable for certain crops. Well, I know the argument is that you should grow whatever is native there, but you could find yourself investing a lot of money into a garden to replace a lawn only to have crops die off or wildlife like rabbits and voles eating your crops when you're not watching. And good luck with some pets in your yard. You want to keep them from eating up all your hard work. Trying to keep dogs and cats from munching your future food can be hard on both you and your pets. And if you're a suburbanite and you have an acre of yard land, sure, you could find a little area to grow a small garden. Hey, I like gardens, and I think people should try their hands at gardening. But you can't use all your yard for a garden, and especially if you have kids. Kids need some area to run around, and they can't just step around heads of lettuce when playing outside. A grass yard area lets them romp and play with a lesser chance of harm. So what about growing a meadow to replace a yard? Now, a meadow has its challenges and problems too. A meadow can take several years to grow before you have anything of usefulness, and there's just as much weeding needed to maintain a meadow as with a garden. And a meadow thrives best in poorer soil that doesn't have many nutrients. So if you live with fertile soil, you might not have a good chance with a meadow. And allowing a wildflower meadow to grow also requires you to let grasses grow tall. And if you don't want tall grass with your wildflowers, well, you would have to pull grass along with your weeds. Yeah, just try it. I don't think so. And yeah, we've all heard of children romping through the vast meadows of pre-industrial America, but meadows are just not suitable for a lot of kids' activities. Not all kids like to trudge through tall grasses and meadow wildflowers. They might want to run on shorter grasses and play yard games, and meadows just aren't suitable for that. Tall grasses and wildflowers from meadows can become a breeding ground for ticks, and ticks can spread Lyme disease. And if there's a chance of your meadow harboring ticks, you need to wear protective gear and keep shirts tucked into your pants and your pants tucked into your socks or shoes. Yeah, that sounds like a fun yard where your kids can frolic, right? Now, of course, there are ways to keep ticks out of homegrown meadows, but they're far more likely a problem to manage with meadow plants than with lawns. And if it comes to fertilizing and herbicides and insecticides and such, there are both chemically dangerous and natural sources of fertilizer and insecticide for both turf grass lawns and gardens or meadows. Yes, I would advise looking for non-toxic fertilizers and pesticides for your lawn. So the problem with fertilizers and pesticides isn't unique to grass lawns. It applies to meadows, gardens, and vast acres of farmland as well. So let's stop blaming lawns for this. And I see lawns get a lot of flack, but not as much for golf courses. Just think of all that manicured grass just to knock little balls around into holes. But no, we have to feel especially guilty about our lawns because it's middle-class property. The whole agenda against lawns just seems to be anti-capitalist and anti-middle-class freedom. And the champagne socialists, of course, still need their golf courses. So I found an article by an Edwin Benson entitled "Why Your Beautiful Lawn is Now a Racist and Ecological Crime." And this is one that's responding to the attacks on lawns. And the article says, "By its very nature, a lawn is a luxury, albeit a commonly available one. Leftists hate even accessible luxuries since they oppose their egalitarian metaphysics. The lawn creates happy landowners of the working class that clashes with their narratives of misery." And then later on in the article it says, "The socialist model is found in public family housing concentrated in large apartment blocks without private lawns." And then it later says, "Residents would be tenants of the state, never owners. Belonging to no one, they were often ill-maintained and magnets for crime and vice. Residents often were reduced to barricading themselves up in their apartments." Yes, the real socialist project is never single-family homes with gardens or meadows. It's clustered apartment dwellers, where nature is something that we can only observe but never own. And the state owns the land and manages the means of production. and we get the meager food that they provide from their collectively owned farms, and we live in walled dungeons surrounded by asphalt. So does the Bible say anything about lawns? Well, not lawns in particular, but let's go back to the creation account in Genesis 1 and verses 11 and 12, where it says, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, deshe, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, deshe, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good." And the word for grass there, deshe, means grass. It's what sheep, oxen, and deer eat in the field, as in Psalm 23:2 and Jeremiah 14:5 and 50:11 demonstrate. Now, this may not be the same type of grass that we have in the United States, but there's such a thing as letting the earth bring forth grass. And what does the Bible say in this creation account not far down? It says that God created humans to have dominion over the animals and the land, and not to let political elites deprive us of that. Genesis 1:26 says, "And God said, Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth," or eretz, meaning land, "and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God wants us to have dominion over things, and including the land, the soil, and the grass. And since we're made in the image of God, and we have a sense of creativity just as God is the creator of all things, we also have concepts such as aesthetics and human ingenuity and art. And we can create things, and we have an intuitive sense that there's such a thing as beauty that isn't just strictly letting nature run wild or not bringing things from one area of the world to another. We don't have to maintain indigenous crops. We don't have to separate things across oceans. We're meant to have dominion over all the earth. And we're meant to express our God-given creativity with that, which includes farms and meadows and lawns. Lawns are perfectly okay. God is okay with us owning land. God is okay with us owning lawns. And lawns aren't evil. Lawns don't harm the environment. So how about we can just remove that elitist bullseye from our lawns? So I hope that this episode was helpful, that you enjoyed it, and that, maybe if you didn't realize that there was a controversy over lawns, well, now you know. And in the process, that if you felt guilty about some of the arguments against lawns, well, I hope you can feel okay with your lawn. By all means, grow gardens, grow meadows. Try your hand at that. Be creative, as you're made in the image of God. But also enjoy your lawns free from the attacks of the elitist ideologues. And stay tuned for the next episode of Truth Espresso, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truth Espresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truth Espresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at christianpodcastcommunity.org.